Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I'm really excited to be joined tonight by the authors of Did That Just Happen? Beyond Diversity, Creating Sustainable and Inclusive Organizations. It looks like this. It's just out last week. And I'm joined by Dr. Stephanie Pinder-Amaker, who is a clinical psychologist and Harvard Medical School professor who is committed to achieving multicultural excellence in organizations. As a founding director of McLean Hospital's College Mental Health Program, she has consulted with numerous institutions on diversity and inclusion. She is also the co-founder of Twin Stars Diversity Trainers, a consultation company offering diversity and identity-related trainings for organizations. Dr. Pinder-Amaker currently serves as the McLean Hospital Harvard Medical School's Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. And we're also joined by Dr. Lauren Wadsworth, who is a clinical psychologist passionate about furthering diversity and inclusion efforts. She serves as a senior advisor on the Anti-Racist Justice and Health Equity team at McLean Hospital Harvard Medical School. She is the founder and director of the Genesee Valley Psychology, also known as GVP, a clinic providing evidence-based treatment to the Rochester, New York area and specializing in OCD, trauma, DBT, and a newly launched Racial Trauma and Healing Center. She is also the co-founder of Twin Stars Diversity Trainers, a consultation company offering diversity and identity-related trainings for organizations and leadership. Finally, she is a clinical senior instructor in psychiatry at the University of Rochester Medical Center. So welcome so much to you both. We're really glad to have you here, and we're glad to have everyone watching with us at home. I want to encourage folks, if you have questions for either of our esteemed conversant folks tonight, to put the questions in the chat or in the ask a question area. This book is such a wonderful, easy to use resource. That doesn't mean that the topics are easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it is so accessible. And I just wanted to start out by offering that appreciation, because I think one of the criticisms that is often leveraged at those of us who are trying to do this work, particularly around dismantling white supremacy and justice work in general, is we make it too hard on people, right? You got to learn all the right words, and this is too complicated, and why should people take the time to do this, right? And of course, I have many reasons why people should take the time to do this for our own health and souls and all of those reasons. But I also do think often people do have a point that we make our tools a little hard to access. And this book is wonderfully easy to read, to understand, and to immediately dig into and find applicable tools for individuals and organizations. So I'm hoping y'all can just start out by telling us a little bit about how you formed your team, your working team, and how you came to the point of writing this book.
Can we just say, first of all, thank you so much for having us. We're really, really excited to be here with you. And the feedback that you just gave us, you just don't even know how it's making our hearts sing right now. Like, you're just speaking directly to one of the things that motivated us the most about writing the book. I mean, one of our primary goals was to do exactly what you just said, and to get the skills and the tools and the information into the hands of the people who need them, and to make the work accessible. And, you know, we're both clinical psychologists, as you just heard in the introduction, and in our field, like in so many other fields, we use a ton of jargon. And from day one, we just sat down and talked with each other about, like, let's eliminate all of the jargon. Like, let's just make this so that people can get it. Right. So I just want to say, first and foremost, like, we're just thrilled to hear you say that. It was a primary goal of writing the book.
Yeah, and I think part of that is actually what inspired us to write the book, that we had been ascribed the role of diversity expert, each separately in many spaces that we worked, because we were the only or one of the few. And that ascribing of the role of diversity expert has a lot of challenges. It has risks associated with it, professionally, emotionally. And oftentimes it doesn't go well. So one of the motivations for writing the book was to have a place to channel all of our passion that grew over the years, all of the skills, and all of the frustration for when it didn't go right. And we were talking the other day at another event, and we came up with this term of the book was nice because it didn't talk back, and it didn't have white fragility flaring up. It didn't have internalized homophobia coming up, and
no defensiveness. Like that didn't happen.
No oppressive listening. And it was just so cool to be able to channel everything we wanted to say to organizations without being worried about how it was landing. And so I think the book was born out of, in a lot of ways, negative emotions, but writing it transformed those into positive ones. And how we formed our working team, I don't know, Stephanie, do you want to cover that one?
Wow, how we formed our working team is such a good, I mean, it just happened so, I guess, organically. You know, we were working together as psychologists in an academic medical center. And just by nature of the work that we were doing, we were in a lot of shared spaces together. And as Lauren mentioned earlier, it even predates that. I'm sorry, I skipped a part. We knew of each other before we actually got into the same space where we were working in the same hospital. So I was doing some diversity, equity, and inclusion work within the field of psychology in this particular place. And some of my colleagues, in particular, this one psychology intern that I was supervising one year, kept talking about this Lauren Wadsworth in the work that we were doing. And we were really trying to push the envelope to create some more inclusive spaces and develop some new psychological tools and resources and interventions for the place that we were working. And so just encountering all of the expected challenges when you try to bring about change like that. And so in that process, and then through our supervision and talking, this name, Lauren Wadsworth, kept coming up. And you say, well, clearly you know each other. You do so much of the same work and you're so similar. So, and I was like, who is this Lauren Wadsworth? Like, no, I mean, we have to meet. So I actually knew about Lauren before she came to the organization, and the person who we had in common really facilitated our getting together. They were determined that not only would we get, we work together in the same organization, but that we would actually be connected in a very specific way. You can share more about that if you want, Lauren.
Well, I would like to share that it was, I think Stephanie's underselling herself a little bit in this situation. Stephanie has been one of the main people pushing not only diversity efforts at our organization that we were at, but also a huge expert in college mental health, maybe one of the leading experts in the world, definitely in the United States. And because of she is just a legend. So I was so lucky to be paired with her as a supervisor, and really lucky that someone was willing to they're now there to connect us, and we've been pretty inseparable ever since. She let me stick around is basically how it happened.
Well, that's wonderful. And I think one of the things that I appreciate about this book is because y'all are a team, you also have the ability to talk a little bit about team dynamics and things like that too, from your own personal experience. And I think you mentioned being the only one in the room in your respective careers and the risks inherent in this. And I think one of the ideas is, if you're the only one in your organization, whether that's the only person who's queer, or the only person who is Black, or the only person who has a disability that, is, visible disability that you know of, whatever it might be, that you're feeling alone in your organization, maybe you can just slide this book under the door, right, of the HR manager, of your team leader, or whoever has the power in the situation so that the double burden of being someone who is already navigating a lot within the organization doesn't also mean that you're doing so much of the education. And I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more, particularly because y'all are psychologists, what is that burden on people? What does it do to people to have to both live? Well, first, I would love for you to talk about the term. You use a different term than the term that some people may know, microaggression. You offer what I think is a better term. So maybe you could say tell us the term that y'all use, and then talk about the impact of that, if you would.
Well, Stephanie came up with that wonderful term, so I'll let you describe it, and I'm happy to answer the other part.
Okay, so the term that we coined for the book is identity-related aggressions. And we came up with that term for a couple of reasons. One, there's a lot of discussion and debate in the field about use of the micro part of it, that somehow the micro part of the phrase somehow minimizes the significant impact of the insult or the aggressive act. And so we decided to remove the micro and to replace it with identity related, and also to make it, again, sort of emphasizing, that it can occur across identities. And then IRA, for short, we thought this was an interesting exchange when we were talking about the concept. I was saying that an IRA also reminds us, if you think about it in terms of what it means in the finance world, that it reminds us of the cumulative impact, right? It's not just the single identity related aggression. It's that it happens over and over and over again. And that pain really accumulates over time and can take a very significant both physical and psychological toll on the health of individuals. So that's how we came up with the term IRA, to replace microaggressions.
And so
Lauren, you wanted, yeah.
Sure. I think my audio might be delayed. So if I'm staring awkwardly at the camera, that's what it is. So going into an organization, for example, as a queer person myself, I know that that I'm not visibly queer, and whatever that means, I know that I'm straight passing. So I know that there's going to be a moment or many moments where if I'd like to be my full self, I'm going to have to come out in the organization. Other folks with different identities, such as race, don't have that choice, right? So when we say like entering an organization, it might mean when you come out or when you're walking in the door. But when you do, just being that person that has an identity that people don't have practice with or haven't gotten feedback around the IRAs, you're just bound to and sort of destined to experience this onslaught of people's lack of learning. And that comes at the expense of your own emotional health and well-being. Not only can it trigger sadness or sense of rejection or anger or anxiety, but it can also make you feel or symbolize that you don't belong here, because clearly there isn't a space for you, or there hasn't been practice for people like you here. So it just can kind of put this gnawing question in your mind of, do I fit in here? Is this a place for me or not? And then just existing is sort of idiosyncratic in a way. So then the idea of, do I give this organization feedback on what they need to do to change, would make you even more idiosyncratic and would make you even more outside the norm and puts you at greater risk. So some folks, many of us, choose to kind of try to lay low, try to focus on, I think about it like Super Mario, going into the job, learning it as best you can to like build up your size so that you're like, this Lauren is this really hard worker. So then when Lauren is also queer and I like shrink in size a little bit, I have more room to shrink. And so having to even just think about navigating timing or navigating or working harder than others around you to make up for an identity. I mean, the list goes on, but those are some of the things that come to mind for me when thinking about being an only or the one of few in the room.
Well, and we're seeing, during the pandemic, so many people who experience IRAs in the workplace, who have been fortunate or unfortunate, depending, but not going into a physical workplace, either because they're able to work from home or because they've been unemployed, say, I don't want to go back to work because my mental health is so much better at home. And I'm not dealing with this bullshit,
That's absolutely right.
I mean, and I see it most clearly, the communities that we are most connected to, it's like, Black folks and then trans folks. Like, it's just like two groups of people who experience so much violence on a day-to-day basis, just being like, me not having to navigate the world, like, is really nice, but also that's really sad that people feel so much happier in this deep isolation of COVID, right? And so to me, that's heartbreaking, but also deeply understandable. And so that's why books like this are so important, because I think many well-intentioned, HR people, leaders, all this stuff are like, but we're trying to do the right thing and make our organization really welcoming, and we legitimately don't understand why it's not, right? I think sometimes those folks get caricatured as being really clumsy or mean or wrong-headed, and I think in general there are many people who are deeply invested, at least intellectually, in justice, who still are making a lot of assumptions about what different groups of people need, and there's a big learning curve. And so I'm wondering, one of the things I appreciate about your book is kind of really mapping out in the early section of the book why incorporating people who have never been a part of your work culture into your work culture is not just the simple thing of like, let's get diverse hires. Like, that's not really, you can't put, you also talk about not putting the cart before the horse, right? Like, both of those things that's sort of the bookends of the book. And so I'm wondering, I think that's so key. And intent versus impact comes up a lot in that. And so I'm wondering if y'all could sort of walk us through that a little bit, because I think people are legitimately well-intentioned a lot of the time, but really do a lot of harm to people in the effort to like make their workplace better.
It's such a good question, and it's such a basic concept. When we're working and talking with organizations, sometimes we'll ask them to just try to close their eyes and get a visual image of the cart going before the horse. Just another way to try to grasp like how just wrong that is. Like, just close your eyes and imagine the cart going before the horse, and like, okay, that's not going to go very well. And then imagine that cart and that vehicle going up an incline, which is very much what this learning curve can feel like across organizations and systems and families even, right? Working to become more inclusive. It's hard work, and it's going up that incline. Well, if you can sometimes we'll say to people, just try to hold on to that image. Like, if you can remember that, and if you forget everything else that we're talking about, that image is the mistake that we're making, and we're all guilty of it. Systems, organizations, all across industries, of sort of really pushing and striving and clawing to bring diversity into the organization, right? Like, we're in some ways in an exciting and a hopeful, but also a dangerous time for that very reason. We have people making all kinds of commitments and statements about how they're going to do better and increase their diversity. So we are still at really high risk of putting the cart before the horse. And quite simply, that means inviting people with different identities to come into the workspace, one, because it's the right thing to do. The research tells us overwhelmingly, convincingly, that you get a better outcome for doing that. More creativity improves the bottom line and so forth. But we're really lousy at making people feel welcome in those spaces. And we're not doing we're not prepared to bring people of different backgrounds into the same spaces. We don't have the skills. We don't know how to navigate across differences. We don't know how to talk to each other. And so it's just sort of like a a very basic and common and pervasive error to put all of the resources and the effort to bringing in diverse talent and not making sure that your organization is prepared to really nurture and cultivate that diverse talent effectively. And not only is it sort of a misstep that we make over and over again, like just not learning from our mistakes, but it's also really dangerous and painful and costly.
Yeah, so in terms of what to do instead, the first number one question is, why don't you have the horse to pull the cart? Why do you need to come up with initiatives to increase diversity? Why isn't it here already? Because certainly trans folks and Black folks and folks in wheelchairs across the country have jobs. So why aren't they here? And what have you been doing to signal that this isn't the place for them? And then figuring out, what are you going to do to earn it? Because if it increases our bottom line, if it increases our quality of life as a whole community and culture, what are you going to do to invest in that? Of course, nowadays, everyone wants to be more diverse, it seems, but it doesn't seem like organizations are prepared to invest on an ongoing basis in terms of financially, but also emotionally, and in terms of meetings together to learn how to do these things and have these conversations. It's not going to be one workshop and done. It's really changing an entire workplace culture. And that is going to come up, that's going to bring mistakes that are going to need to be healed from. So making sure that not only is your company actively, or your group actively learning together, but how are they preparing for when things go wrong? How are they preparing for future needs for healing, mediation, etc.?
So, we get this question a lot because Charis does some of this work. And folks reach out to me and they say, my group is, pretty monolithically white, maybe 80-85% white. It's majority straight, it's majority cisgender. We have all the heart, all the love, all the intention in the world, leftist politics, all this stuff. But we don't know what we're doing when we do that self-interrogation around what are we doing that is signaling to the world that we are an inhospitable place. We can't see it in ourselves. And so I'm wondering, and I think that's pretty common, particularly for white people, to really be unaware of our own IRAs for sure, and the ways in which we make spaces so centered on whiteness, and particularly corporate and work spaces so centered on whiteness that we really can't imagine what a space that wasn't centered around whiteness or catering to white people would feel like. Like to me, it often feels like a total lack of imagination. Just like, what would it be like if this wasn't, built for white people? But I often really struggle to offer the next step from an asset-based place for those kind of deeply entrenched white spaces. Like, how do you, is there a set of questions that you might suggest folks kind of walk through?
The first question is the one that Lauren just said, which is, before you do anything else, really ask yourselves, challenge yourselves as an organization with the question, why aren't we diverse right now? Like, really sit and ask the question, like, what is it about us? And really try to understand. I understand what you're saying, but if we're just sitting around the conference room table looking at each other and none of us has the answers, then what do we do? But still, it's important to stop first and ask that question. And then,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I just think one little quick thing to add in there was one thing is, okay, well, our website is 100% white folks, or our group is 80% white folks. So when people see us meeting, they notice that, right? So I think instead of pretending that's not happening, and just, we often meet with organizations that say, we invite all sorts of folks with all different identities to interviews and they don't stick. We don't know what it is. Well, you can't just be like, oh, I hope they don't notice that we're all white, or I hope they notice that we're trying to, bring in more diversity. Instead, name it. Don't pretend that it's not happening, so, and name it carefully and quickly and not overly, just descriptive or whatever it is. But that's just one quick thought that came to mind.
We love the idea of organizations really getting themselves skilled up to prepare, and for people to come in, you have to have like some ability to have dialogues across differences, know how to make an apology. For example, it's something we're really bad at doing, is just like noticing, like, I really screwed that up and I'm so sorry. And how do you say that and move through it and sort of move the relationship, whatever that might be, to the next level. But we talk a lot about the skill set around the contrast between learning how to conduct empowered listening versus oppressive listening. And that's something that, any organization can practice that before, like that's part of building the horse before hitching the cart there, right? Like get yourself ready with some of these skills so that you're not inviting people into a situation in which they are going to experience, IRA after IRA, experiences of bias and marginalization, develop these skills. So that's one sort of construct that we talk about, and talk with organizations, managers, leaders, directors, anyone, about the fact that historically we're giving a lot of credit for and reinforced for certain types of listening behaviors, or certain types of styles of communication, like coming up with, you ask a question, and if we can come up with a quick answer, and be funny and to the point, then we might be looked upon favorably in the organization. So we talk about like that in organizations, we're often reinforced for those kinds of behaviors, like taking up all the space in the room, doing all of the talking, having a commanding presence in the room, suggesting that we get it. Like, yeah, you come in and explain this, and I get it. I get that, Lauren. Like that. Listen, let me tell you, I can relate to that because, I'm a woman and blah, 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 and so forth. And so in many industries, those behaviors are what really help us to advance in the organization. But in the context of promoting inclusive organizations, those skills are experienced as oppressive. And we have to know how to hear when people come in, people with different backgrounds come into the organization, they say, you know what, such and such happened, and that didn't feel so good. And I'd like to talk about that. We have to know how to be able to hear that in a way that empowers the speaker. We have to know those skills before we invite people into the organization, how to sit back, how to listen, how to really hear, how to seek to understand instead of just listening so that, you can process the next witty, answer or come up with a quick solution. Well, you're not going to end, racism overnight. If that were possible, it would have been done maybe centuries ago. So, there can be real power in saying, I want to really understand what you're saying, and I'm going to take responsibility for learning more. But that's an example of one set of skills that we think is learnable, as part of building the horse before presenting the cart. And there are lots of others.
I mean, I think the empowered listening piece is so key, and it's the part that I struggle with so much, and so I really appreciate the reminder of like the goal is not to try and fix things. That's actually really arrogant to think that you just gonna fix somebody's problem in 2 seconds. But I also appreciate the framing of that does come from an empathetic place, in the sense of like discomfort with you've sensed someone's pain enough to want to acknowledge it, but you don't necessarily have the appropriate skills yet to honor it in the right way. So you're just like, oh, I want to do something about this because I know it's bad.
Take it away.
Yeah, I want to take it away. I hear the emotional content of it, but I don't know how to fix it. And so some of this is my own discomfort that I want to minimize and calm down. But some of it is genuinely, I also want to help calm your discomfort, right? And I think that is so often the source of miscommunication and pain between we're talking organizationally, sure, but also interpersonally at every level, right? It's like what might make one person feel seen and heard or supported might really shut another person down, right? And I think y'all do such a beautiful job of giving really clear examples of, no, you telling me like, oh yeah, I feel you, like this, I also hate our parking situation, like to someone who uses a wheelchair and only
Yeah.
has one or two spots that are always taken up. That's really invalidating, right? Like that's a really crappy thing to say, right? So I think that's very helpful, and I think that's so practical for people to say, oh, I can practice this. This does not require a diverse workforce for me to practice this. I can practice this with my children, I can practice this with my partner. I can practice this alone in the mirror when I'm feeling stressed out. I really think we have many opportunities in our life to practice these things. And the other piece that I thought is really, there's a mindfulness piece that y'all offer that I think is so important about really teaching people to notice what thoughts are coming up for you, and to kind of build distance between thought and action, or sort of saying, well, why did I make an assumption about that person's life, right? And I wonder if you could just say a little bit about sort of, there is some brain science behind that, and since y'all are both psychologists, could you give us a little bit of grounding on why that's a helpful intervention?
Of course. I feel Stephanie's looking at me, even though I can't see it in the Zoom. But yeah, as psychologists, we are trained in most heavily cognitive behavioral therapy, particularly Stephanie and I. There are many different theoretical orientations, but in CBT, the main idea is that if you can get a sense of what thoughts you're having and how those thoughts are leading to emotions, and those emotions are leading to behaviors or behavioral urges, that you can pretty much life hack your whole emotional experience of the world and often your behaviors as well. So if Stephanie was to come in and want to interview at my organization as a white person in a largely white organization, and she was to say, hey, Lauren, I noticed that there aren't any Black people here. And I probably would think, oh my God, Stephanie's calling me a failure. She's criticizing my organization. She's calling into question my whole leadership. Oh my God, I'm white. Like all these thoughts, right? And that's going to lead to anxiety, shame, sadness. And those emotions are probably going to lead, like you said a few minutes ago, to wanting to do something to change that emotional state. And that whatever we have the urge to do first is likely driven from those negative emotions, which are typically more short-term fixes that might in the long term cause more problems. So for example, saying to Stephanie, oh, don't worry about it. Like actually there are tons of people coming in, you just haven't met them yet. Like it'll be fine. Can calm my nerves. And then if Stephanie's in an interview position, what is she going to do? She'll be like, okay, noted, but then smile and nod, right? And then I think, okay, that went pretty well. Did I cut out? Okay.
A little bit, yeah.
And so that's emotion-driven action. And as humans, we constantly have CBT triangles going on. Thoughts leading to feelings, leading behaviors, leading to more thoughts. Oh, that went well. I'll do that again next time, right? And so what we want to do in the book is teach people how to use those CBT skills to your power. If you can start to notice that chain happening, you can start to catch it sooner. And then in that space of noticing, you have more choice, right? So if I hear my thoughts start fire, oh my God, I'm white. Oh my God, she thinks I'm a failure. Oh my God, I really wanted her to join this team, feeling anxious. And then I can say, oh, okay, remember when your heart races, you often jump to old behaviors or less helpful behaviors. What would it be like to just pause, even to say to Stephanie in that moment, wow, you brought up something big. Let me just take a moment to really take that in. maybe that's okay. And maybe that's actually more healthy than jumping to whatever I think of first, right? And then in that moment, I can notice internally, okay, I'm feeling really anxious. I want that feeling to go away. And I'm going to have to sit with that anxiety because that is something that's true about our organization and it's not okay. And how can I respond in an empowering way that communicates to Stephanie that I'm open to hearing that and that it's okay to say that. So that's where we would try to use the empowering skills in that moment. But it does take mindfulness. A lot of people describe that deer in headlights moment. That's actually the name of the book. Did that just happen? Like, oh my God. And usually we can get, there's fight, flight, or freeze, right? And we often freeze in these identity related events. So if we can even just notice, I'm frozen right now, and even just name that. Like, Stephanie, I'm frozen right now, because that's a big thing and that's important. I don't know what to say quite yet, but I really appreciate you trusting me enough to bring that up.
Yeah, give me a moment to think about it and process it, and I'll get back to you. You just pointed out something, Lauren, that is another sort of really
I think Stephanie might be frozen, ironically, while we're talking about freezing, but hopefully.
Oh no. I thought it was just my internet because the rain came in.
And it's also storming in Atlanta, so.
Oh my goodness.
I know. Well, while we were waiting for Stephanie to come back, the process of freezing has an emotional and psychological utility, right? And my understanding is that it's because these identity-based errors that we're making, when we hurt someone, they do feel like a real physical threat to our brains. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And
yeah, the same system is fired as if the house lit on fire, we'd have the same emotional response.
so I want to say that only to remind all of us to offer ourselves compassion in those moments, because I know a lot of people really beat themselves up if they freeze. And I sort of try to remember, even for myself, that honors how important these conversations are. If your body is treating it like it's that big of a deal, it's because it is. But also that means that we can give it the loving attention that it needs, right? And really honor the primacy of these identities and these conversations in our lives. So even if you freeze in the moment, you can always go back, right? I mean, the other thing is, obviously this is context dependent, depending on our relationships to one another. But if you have a pre-existing relationship with someone, returning to that person and saying, are you open to me following up? And one of the suggestions that y'all make is, kind of saying, are you open to, if an apology is necessary, like, are you open to this in writing? And, like giving some options as to, and letting the person dictate the terms. I mean, I think that's often where people get stuck is, how do I go back? Like, I just want to shrivel up and die.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to go back, but I need to. What do I do? And how do I make this? How do I reopen? I know it's the right thing to reopen a hard conversation. I'm afraid, but I'm going to do it. How do I take that next step?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I think just to add to the compassion piece real quick, we're anxious because we care. We don't get anxious about things that we don't care about or that aren't a threat in some way, right? So if I'm feeling anxious in that conversation with Stephanie, likely it's because I really want her to like me and I want her to like the company. And so reminding myself, I froze because I really care and I just don't have the skills yet. And I appreciate you bringing up letting the person set the terms. Sometimes we like to use a strategy of no need to reply to even this email, but I would love to I think it's important for me just to name that I froze today in a moment where I wish I didn't. And I'd be happy to talk more about what I wish I had said or share my commitment to future learning and making things better at this organization. But I also realize that you might not want to talk to me much more today or this week, and that's really okay. So just know that I'm here. I'm happy to send something in writing, in a text, in person, go for a walk, meet outside of the workplace, and all of those are totally fine. Welcome back.
Hello, we got you.
The power just flickered, and so the whole connection dropped.
Oh no.
You know, I try to remember that it is a miracle that we are all very far away and can talk to each other. So when there's technical problems, it is what it is. So we were just talking about sort of the process of returning to a conversation after maybe you've made a mistake or you've hurt someone, and the process of how you kind of ask if it's okay to follow up. Because I think that's really important, and people often want to do that, but really do get paralyzed around what the next step is. And so then they don't do it. And then it becomes this thing hanging over their head. And then it becomes worse and worse and worse, and can really cause, I think, deep fissures, particularly if you share common space, because you're passing a person in the hallway and you have not dealt with this very important thing, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And so I think reminding folks to practice like normalizing going back and being like, hey, I messed up, and you don't necessarily need to process this with me, but I just need to tell you that I know. And I think that we often hear that people struggling with where the line is of, I often hear Black people and other folks of color say, I really don't want to process any of this shit with white people. So like, whatever your feelings are about this, that's fine. Like, thanks for the apology, but I'm not interested. And then white people being like, but am I even causing more of an issue by trying to apologize? And I think it is messy, but I appreciate that one of the things that y'all say in the book is like, whatever the response from that person is, that's the response. That doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility to do what you need to do as the person who has done something harmful.
Yeah,
there's this recurring. I know. I was just going to say, because it linked back to what you were saying, Lauren, before the power flickered, which is there is this recurring theme throughout the book of getting more comfortable tolerating discomfort. And there are lots of skills and strategies for doing that. We talk about riding the wave and pausing and allowing some of the mindfulness practices. And one thing that we often remind folks is to sort of just stop and think that the level of discomfort that you might be feeling in that moment, whatever it is, the anxiety, the guilt, the shame, that it truly pales in comparison to what the person who has been on the receiving end of that identity-related insult has experienced or is trying to share. And so I think if we can just get better at just remembering that, oh yeah, I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now. And you know what? It's nothing in contrast to what this individual has been holding or has been carrying every day in the workplace or in this organization or relationship. So that is a recurring theme, getting comfortable tolerating discomfort.
Yeah. And I would just add to really think about, before you apologize, what is my goal of apologizing? And then even like sit and play it out in your head and really think, like, really be honest with yourself. What is your desired outcome here? Or what could I imagine doing in this moment or wanting? And if you're wanting the person to say, it's okay, I forgive you, then that's not an okay way to go into that apology, because you have to be comfortable not feeling any better after it and maybe feeling worse for it to be an empowering apology for the other person. So if you are to go in solely trying to keep them the emotional focus, not yourself, focus on giving apology as opposed to receiving forgiveness. And it really doesn't matter if they ever respond. And I think that's so hard for folks in a privileged position to understand, whatever identity that is. I would really embrace the no need to respond email and make it really okay in the workplace not to respond to those emails, because there's almost no way to respond without having to give something back or to say, I don't want to give anything back. And both of those can be harmful for the person who already was harmed.
Right. And also, you may have already talked about this, but asking for permission to apologize.
Yeah,
You did. Yeah. Okay.
I want to flip to the other sort of side of this scenario, which is being strategic for your own self-care when you are the person who has experienced the IRA, right? So you give 3 examples of people who are in various scenarios where someone makes assumptions about them or, does a IRA against them, right? And they make different choices. You kind of walk us through making different choices based on context about how they might respond. And I think it's really valuable to remember that we don't always need to privilege action, because I think sometimes people, especially who are new to this work, regardless of their identity, feel like, oh, am I a sellout if I don't, fight the good fight every time and like say always speak up for myself, or like, am I not being real if I don't always stand up for myself? And I think people who have historically, held less power often feel then doubly put upon. Like, not only am I dealing with this, but now also I'm supposed to always speak up for myself in every little situation when that's not even necessarily actually beneficial to me. And so I appreciated the sort of walking through the logic of, sometimes it's helpful to respond with humor. Sometimes it's helpful to just keep it moving. Sometimes it's helpful to pull someone aside. There are a lot of ways that we can engage when someone has harmed us. And so I wonder, kind of how did y'all frame that out, and how did you think through, when to use what strategies, I guess?
Well, across the board, sort of a universal lesson that we lead with is that if you're a person who holds a rising or historically marginalized identity, and you're on the receiving end of an identity-related aggression, first and foremost, that, we would like to think about like how best to empower people. So we think it's really important to try to impart the message that it is your choice what to do or what not to do in that situation. That's the very first thing you can do to regain a sense of power and control, is to remember that no one gets to tell you. We don't get to dictate. We can give you recommendations, guidelines. Here are a range of strategies. But every situation, has its own power structure and variables to consider. But we always lead with that basic message. I think it's so important for people to hear, like, to let go of all of that, the additional weight of feeling like you have to fight the good fight and come up with the quick response or the witty thing. Like, it's just an unnecessary additional burden. And there's enough of a burden to begin with. So we really lead with the message that you get to choose. So again, back to the point of like, just pause and know that you can choose to do nothing in the moment, and that is your choice.
And, if there's a significant concern around job loss or job insecurity or housing insecurity or financial insecurity broadly, it might be more likely that the person will have to protect their job for their sake, for their safety and well-being. And that's why there are many options within that category as well. That it's, we could have written the book about fighting the good fight and not included making a joke about your own identity. But the truth is that sometimes we have to do that to survive, to get to the next level in our career. And that's not okay. And it's okay. It is how it is. And so it's okay to make that choice sometimes if you're prioritizing your family or your career or your financial stability.
Yeah, I think that's very realistic. And I appreciate, again, I really appreciate the practicality of this book. I also just want to show people that this book is slim, which I think, often as a bookseller, people come in and they want something they can just grab and go. They want something that they can read pretty quickly on their lunch break, and feel like, all right, they didn't put in a bunch of extra stuff just because they wanted to hit a certain page limit. And I think, what I want readers to know is that there's basically action items and actionable ideas on almost every page of this book. And there are also great stories and vignettes from lots of different people. So can you talk a little bit about how y'all chose these vignettes and who, were they real people? Did they sort of get sourced from real people? How did those come together?
Do you want me to start with that?
Yeah.
So many of the vignettes, they're all from real people, real experiences. You'll know that some of the vignettes are from our own experiences. Some of the vignettes where people gave us permission to use their identities or their full, and some people did, then that's in the book, and those people are acknowledged in the book. And then, as you might imagine, there were folks who really wanted their stories or their narratives to be shared, but did want to be de-identified. And so, we did that. We honored those requests, of course, across the board. And there, unfortunately, I think the really, I was thinking about a question we get asked a lot is like, or not a lot, but what did you personally enjoy most about writing the book? And was thinking that my answer to that question is one of the parts I enjoyed the most was writing the vignette and sort of also sourcing those vignettes as we both did, and the process of reading them back to the person who held whose story it was to own and getting their feedback. Like that whole process was one of the most enjoyable things about the book. And then at the same time, it was also one of the most painful and one of the most difficult things about writing the book, as you might imagine, because there were no shortage of narratives from which we had to pull.
Yeah, and something that we tried to be really mindful of was trying to include narratives across different identities. So not only focusing on sexual orientation and race, because those are our identities, but trying to expand into identities including ableism and disability status,
Religion,
origin, religion, spirituality, ethnicity as a separate construct, and et cetera. The list goes on and on, disability status with mental health. And that was really important to us too, to kind of walk the walk in terms of always trying to think about all the identities as opposed to just the ones that came most readily to us. There are identities that we have less experience working with, and we tried to not, I think it's not perfect. That is something that I wish I could improve on in the book and would have made the vignettes even more expansive, but something we tried to push ourselves to do.
So we have a question from the audience, and I think it's actually a great question to kind of pull this whole evening together, which is just, this is from Jasmine Jackson. What inspires you to keep doing this work?
I think moments like these, I mean, it's just been so awesome to have conversations that are feeling very empowering and exciting, and hearing people benefit from the book. It's like the book didn't talk back until it did. Like, we're just on that 70. But now it's like, it's some of the folks that are in the vignettes have since reached out in the last week or two and said, reading the vignette in that book was healing. And that was just shocking to me. I never thought I'd hear it. I know. It was pretty big. So moments like those, and hearing people both appreciate it in the leadership and learning and privilege side, but also feeling very validated by the book. We really wanted to hold both of those equally forefront in writing it.
It's been very inspiring to hear people reach out and say, I wish I had this book in my last organization. If I had had this, I'd still be there.
Mm.
And that just brings it full circle for us. One of the motivations for writing the book was we wanted to write a book that we wished we'd had when we were navigating some of the, myriad challenges of holding rising identities in the workplace.
So if there's one kind of last tip or last thing that you want to make sure folks know, it could be in the book or not, but thing that you've learned or thing that you wish you could write on a billboard and make everybody have to know. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I've got one that I've just been thinking about a lot because we do some work using Ibram Kendi's, anti-racist sort of construct and applying that across, marginalized and rising identities. And so just lately I've been thinking a lot about, a term that he uses specific to racism, but then generalizing it across the isms, that racism is not about who you are, it's about what you do. And that really is at the heart of the book. It's knowing that we can do better. You can learn these skills. You can change your behaviors, across these areas and just do so much better. So I hope that people feel that sense of empowerment and hope as a takeaway.
Yeah, I think these last couple of weeks working with a few organizations, I've been really reflecting on, and even my own, just to be totally transparent, that diverse teams aren't something to be completed or achieved or acquired, but something that needs to be consistently on a daily and weekly basis earned, and that requires an extreme level of commitment and vulnerability, and it's never done. And so I think getting away from seeing it as a checkbox like we tend to do in our world, and instead seeing, okay, I'm entering into a new type of relationship, and that's going to take a lifelong commitment like any relationship would.
Yes. I love that, because I think the more we can, this all kind of comes back to the CBT practice in some ways. Like, all of these things are integrating these tools and these practices into our day-to-day life in a more habitual an organic way, instead of acting like I'm going to flip a switch and suddenly become an anti-racist person. It's like, no, we all need to practice training our brains every moment of every day so that we can behave in ways that are in alignment with our values, right? And I think in different ways you both kind of said that, and I think that is such a hopeful way of thinking about this, because if people just are fundamentally forever and ever racist, then there's not much incentive for them to try and change their behavior. And we do know that people can change and have made great change. So I hope for folks who are out there who do have power in your organizations, I hope you'll buy this book and feel empowered by it. If you've been feeling stuck, I hope that you will read this and just put one tool into practice at a time. I think some of these things, making sure to build your horse before the cart. That's a number one takeaway that I got. And if you are someone who doesn't yet hold a lot of power in your organization, I think reading this book will, I think, maybe make you feel less alone, and also validate some ways that you can be strategic to protect yourself and honor your own experience, but also maybe make some paths that will open up more access and more authenticity for your experience in your organization. So I really think this is a book for people at all levels, and also for people who are, this is not just a corporate book, right? So it's really for people, anyone who wants to get better at learning how their brain works in relation to these topics. So thank you both so much. I really do think this is an important book and an exciting book. For folks who are watching at home, you can click this teal button at the bottom center of your screen, and that will take you directly to the link to buy Did That Just Happen? Beyond Diversity, Creating Sustainable and Inclusive Organizations from Charis. It really does help us when you buy the books directly from us. I just, yeah, thank you so much for being here. I hope that the rest of your journey with this book is really fun, and you've done the hard part. So now I hope you just get to bask in the enjoying people's stories and connecting and all the good stuff that comes out of it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. It was an honor to be here. We really enjoyed the discussion with you.
And thank you for reading the book. I know that this is very in line with your values, as I have learned in talking to you today and before we got started. And I just really appreciate it. It means so much to us each time we hear that someone read it. So we really appreciate it and appreciate you inviting us here today.
My pleasure. And I will definitely be recommending it to folks and putting it in many people's hands. So I look forward to getting it out in the world. So we all take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you.